Imagine that you know all the people in the world, their likes, dislikes, goals, and ambitions. When they have a need, your company is there to fulfill it. If they get lonely, you can help them connect with others. This was stated by Vanzan. Deep dive into Ryan Reynolds, George Dewey, maximum effort, and those associated. Ultimately, this is about how a forgotten data company could link to more than we realize, and that company is Vanzan, and the ultimate lack of transparency. Please note the disclaimer. This presentation is for educational and investigative purposes only. It is based entirely on publicly available information, legally obtained documents, and fair use commentary. The individuals and entities mentioned are discussed in a speculative context. No defamatory or knowingly false statements are being made. The goal is to raise questions of public interest, not to assert legal conclusions or accuse anyone of any wrongdoing. I would love comments, feedback, suggestions. You could put them in the comments below. You can message me on TikTok. My TikTok is the same name. This is an evolving conversation, and I want to make sure I'm reporting the best that I can with as much information as I have. And so please understand that this is as much as possible trying to work with everyone in figuring out the answers to the questions we have. Some notable people and businesses we will be discussing: ML Management, Eric Binder, and the person who I think is the link to Vanzan, George Dewey, who happens to be close friend and colleague of Ryan Reynolds. Not only did the company have aliases, but also the founder, Eric Rothschild, as you see here, did. And this is the beginning of what we're going to talk about, which is a lack of transparency. And what does that mean? The original Vanzan company was incorporated in Delaware in 2008, opened a California branch in 2010, and was reincorporated in New York in 2019. In recent filings for this company, we have seen two addresses associated with both Eric Binder and ML Management. And I started to get a little confused by this, and so I wanted to look a little deeper. I had heard from others that Eric Binder seemed to have started working for ML Management and that there was inconsistencies with the dates. And so I wanted to understand what this inconsistent professional history was with ML Management. On the left, you see a screenshot from ML Management's website that discusses how Eric started working there in 2024, and they vaguely said that he worked for two premier firms. Before that, that's where he got experience from. And who are those two premier firms? I have no idea, because on his LinkedIn, it says he only started working for ML Management actually in 2025. And before that, the only thing that's listed is Binder and Company. Something didn't seem right. So I wanted to do a deep dive. And I noticed that the address that's currently listed for their LA location was put there in 2018. And before that, it was a different address. The first time a California address is listed on their website is in 2016, and that's 9000 Sunset Boulevard. Then it was changed in 2018 to 1800 Century Park East. But wait a second. As you see here, those are the same addresses that have been associated with Binder & Co. or Binder & Company, which is Eric Binder's company that he founded. And so what is going on here? And I found tons of different filings, and this is one example of where you see Binder & Company, and you see that 1800 Century Park East, but the same suite number attached to Binder & Company. And yes, this is 2018. And then you see here a 2020 filing, and this one is more directly linking the two because you see Eric Binder, the 1800 Century Park East address, and the ML Management New York address, 888 7th Avenue. And here are two more filings before he apparently worked at ML Management. And we see Leslie Sloan, we know who she is, on the left-hand side, with both Eric Binder and ML Management, as well as the Blake Lively one. I didn't understand the lack of transparency, and I also want to note that I couldn't find, and maybe you can, but I couldn't find that either of the partners of ML Management were actually licensed in California. It looks like they're only licensed in New York. And so I thought, okay, maybe they needed somebody like Eric Binder, who was actually licensed in California, to do some of their California work. But again, why the lack of transparency? Why would they not want to put that out there? So I dug a little deeper. Here you see what I think is two notable lawsuits. The one on the left may have to do with possibly why there was a lack of transparency. I'm going to give you my theory, but I honestly don't really know. This was for a different business than the ones that we've spoken about. It seems like that friend ended up suing because they wouldn't pay her and her husband back as well. And so who knows? Maybe this is connected. This is just speculation, but maybe it was a win-win for both Eric Binder and ML Management. Maybe ML Management didn't have to pay Eric Binder as much and they could use his services, and he could maybe keep that income secret and separate. And then maybe as soon as that lawsuit wrapped up in 2023, they just waited a little bit longer and then they made it official that they were working together. That's all I can truly think of. But I would love to hear what you guys think, of course. Now let's get into the lawsuit on the right, which is really notable. At least I think so, because the defendants are NL Management and none other than Vision PR, Leslie Sloan. We know who she is and who they are. In this 2024 lawsuit, a former employee sues not just Vision PR Inc., but also NL Management Partners, the same company known for managing celebrity business affairs, including Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively's portfolios. Now, it's not unusual for management firms to appear in filings or act as registered agents, but here, ML Management is named as an actual defendant, which suggests something more involved, not just administrative, but potentially operational on their part. When you look through the filings, what seems clear is that they're being depicted, NL Management's being depicted as an entity that is really intertwined in the businesses they manage with day-to-day operations. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because when we're going to talk later about the Vanzan versus Doe's infamous lawsuit and subpoena, NL Management was listed on that lawsuit. And they saw and read differing opinions, and some people said, oh, they're just listed on that, 2024 Subpoena-gate lawsuit because it's just a mailing address. And I think that it raises enough questions because their presence on the Vanzan documents can mean a little bit more than just a paper trail. Who knows? So that begs the question, what is the link? How did they get involved with Vanzan? And I personally think we need to look at George Dewey and really do a deep dive into George Dewey. According to Ryan, George has a deep understanding and appreciation for what audiences want and how to give it to them. Partnering with him at maximum effort is already one of the great highlights of my career, he said. And I personally believe that George is the reason why Ryan is as successful as he is today after doing a deep dive on George. And I do think he is the link to Vanzan. So we're going to jump into it now, and I want to know what you guys think. George worked at McCann Erickson, and he left in 2011, just 1 year after Vanzan was incorporated in California, while still a branch of the Delaware entity. At the time, Vanzan was operating through other names, as we know. Vanzan and those aliases that we know were associated at that time with Equifax. And it's very controversial, their association, because it's tied to legal filings and investigations. So what does this have to do with McCann and George Dewey? Well, one of his biggest accounts, if not biggest account at that major marketing agency, was Verizon Wireless, which is known to get information from Equifax. Okay, so Vanzan/response maker gives information to Equifax, and Equifax gives information to Verizon Wireless. Let's understand this a little bit better, and in order to do that, we have to understand what Vanzan was. Screenshots from Vanzan's now defunct website show how the company presented itself, not as a creative agency, but as a data-driven decision engine. Their pitch, imagine knowing what everyone wants. It was about preemptively guiding decisions. They specialize in matching credit profiles and consumer intent with offers at the right moment. This aligns perfectly with what Equifax offers and what telecoms like Verizon used To me, it feels incredibly sketchy and invasive, and I think that the changes that Vanzan made to its website close to being investigated shows that, because they made some notable changes. To me, they were trying to cover up their tracks. That's what I think. And using what was public facing. The older version, the messaging is very direct. They proudly advertise offering things like exact credit information, late mortgage payments. They highlight their ability to identify consumers by behavior, financial stress, and segmentation, even calling out specific high-risk categories like bankruptcy filings and mortgage delinquencies. This kind of language makes it clear what kind of data was being handled and how intimate that targeting really was. Now look at the newer version on the right. The tone becomes more sanitized. Where the original says start getting the actual exact data, the newer version leans on vaguer phrases like access to important tools. It's a shift from blunt precision to what I'd say is soft marketing language. Why does this matter? Because these changes came just before the company was being pulled into litigation, legal discovery. It looks like a scrub, or at least quiet repositioning, possibly to make public-facing language look different. So back to Equifax. In a 2014 subpoena, response makers / Vanzan was named in a lawsuit they weren't a defendant for, but it was a lawsuit against Equifax, and it basically noted that Vanzan was used. Equifax is one of the 3 main credit bureaus in the United States and a major player in pre-screen marketing. They use data to build credit-optimized mailing lists and digital campaigns, often selling access to telecom providers like Verizon. And the fact that Vanzan was documented to basically having a business and professional relationship with Equifax is massive to have with such a massive company. What that tells me is that this company, Vanzan, that we didn't really know anything about until, again, what we're going to call subpoena gate, is that company, Vanzan, was pretty big if it was having a professional relationship with Equifax. And so regardless of the fact that it seemed to be sketchy with the different names and everything, it had big clients, massive clients. So let's look at this. Vanzan supplies to Equifax. We know Equifax supplies to Verizon. We know that Vanzan supplies raw or behavioral data. Equifax refines that with credit filters and segmentation. So allegedly, Verizon purchases the refined lists and uses it to shape campaigns. That's what they do, down to the zip code, income tier, and device reference. These are not guesses. They're real-time behavioral modeling. And George Dewey, that we know later connects with Ryan Reynolds, but at this time, when Vanzan is incorporated and working with Equifax, he is in charge of the Verizon account. And therefore, it looks like he would likely be on the receiving end of that data from Equifax, from Vanzan. And that's a very likely connection right there. It's also important to note that in 2010, Equifax sold its in-house direct marketing services division, but it didn't stop offering marketing products, so it started depending more on external vendors like Vanzan. Notably, that shift happened the same year Vanzan was incorporated in California, likely as a way to service this new demand. So wait a second, if Dewey was at McCann in 2010, and he was in charge of the Verizon account, he would have seen at that time how there is a shift in how marketing decisions were built around Equifax segments, which may have relied more heavily on Vanzan's information. As creative director, Dewey didn't just write ads. Creative directors translate segmentation data into campaigns. That means using behavioral data likely filtered through Equifax to shape the tone, offer, and placement of each ad. Understanding how credit segments responded differently was a huge part of effective telecom marketing, and that's exactly the kind of insight Vanzan offered on the data side. And again, really important to Dewey's work. So it seems post-2010, Vanzan becomes even more valuable George leaves McCann in 2011, probably taking that information with him, the information that he learned about the data sources. George Dewey and Ryan Reynolds kidnaps. And then, interestingly, in a Quiviric filing in 2019, Vanzan reappears, which happens to be the same year Ryan gets involved with Mint Mobile. Let's wrap our heads around this for a second. 2019, Vanzan is incorporated in New York, and that's what is associated with the lawsuit against the Does, Jeff DeMaldoni. That's when Ryan Reynolds gets involved with Mint Mobile, another telecom company, and it's the year after he and Dewey officially start working together in their company. So what this looks like to me is this wasn't about branding or rebranding. The revived company may have been used to re-access vendor systems, avoid fresh scrutiny, or enable legal filings. The infrastructure may have been still valid. Here, all the company is that Ryan Reynolds and George Dewey by extension are connected to. Just wanted to put this all out there. This is from what I can see online. Whether you like Ryan Reynolds or not, I think it's safe to say that it's clear he is a very smart businessman, and he wouldn't associate himself with a company that is so contaminated if he wasn't getting important things out of it. And that's why I never believed it was just because he liked the name. I think he knew what it offered, and he therefore basically ended up getting the infrastructure and other things. So with all this information, these timelines, I personally think it points to Vanzan actually being the reason why George Dewey and Ryan Reynolds have been so successful. I also think that they didn't realize that people were going to be able to trace them back to Vanzan, which in retrospect I think is kind of silly, but also Ryan's recent filings, like within April 2025, like Maximum Effort Universe, it doesn't list the same names that the other companies list, and so it seems very clear to me that they are trying even harder now to publicly separate themselves from their businesses. Because if something has been made abundantly clear is that now people are watching, they're looking, and they know that. And so I think that that also further shows that they'd never expected people to put two and two together beforehand. In 2024, Vanzan files a lawsuit against anonymous defendants, Subpoena-gate as we know it. Some observers believe the filing wasn't about winning a case, but it was really to enable discovery. So ironically, according to this theory, a lawsuit used for a subpoena to get personal information from a third party used a company that was connected by legal filings and by names in those filings to a company that was based on brokering people's private information and got in trouble for it. That was connected by legal filings and by names in those filings to a company that was based on brokering people's private information and got in trouble for it. Yes, the entity that filed the lawsuit was created in 2019, but we already know that the California entity that was tied to those legal issues in 2010 has Blake Reynolds' name on it. So in summary, what do we think? Vanzan wasn't chosen because they liked how the name sounded. Dewey was positioned perfectly managing Verizon's wireless campaigns while Vanzan was active and was documented as being connected to Equifax, which is a data provider for Verizon. That has been documented. And after Vanzan was forfeited, a new shell was created. Just after, Dewey and Ryan Reynolds joined forces with Maximum Effort, and then right after that, Reynolds and Dewey bought into Mint Mobile, another telecom provider who could benefit the same. We also know in 2021, Blake Reynolds, as CEO of the old entity, was finally publicly connected to that original company, Vanzan Company, and and then to tie it up in that Subpoena-gate Vanzan lawsuit, it looks like, and this is our opinion and others that we've heard, that Vanzan is still being used tactically to take people's private information and personal data for someone's benefit and profit, essentially. And it just perfectly mirrors what that original Vanzan corporation did, because that corporation was investigated for sharing third parties' data. And like I said, that's dating back to Vanzan's conception. So that's pretty wild to me. Remember, on the Vanzan website, it said there's no turning back. Maybe that's what this was always about. A company that claimed to know people's choices before they made them. That kind of insight is powerful. If someone like George Dewey knew how that system worked, it would be a competitive edge for life. Maybe no laws were broken. Maybe it was just smart strategy. But when that kind of infrastructure changes hands quietly, how long have they known how to do it? And who's holding that knowledge accountable? That's what I want to know. Thank you for listening, guys. And if you want a part 2 to dive deeper into Ari Emanuel, let's get to it.